something exciting just arrived in the mail. It's a build-your-own synthesizer kit from 1979. These kits are extremely rare. Other than a listing on this website, miniorgan.com, I was unable to find any record of this thing's existence at all. There are no others for sale anywhere, no old advertising by the manufacturer, nothing. So when I saw one pop up on eBay, I knew immediately that I wanted it. Since I have no idea what this sounds like, my plan is to get out my soldering iron, put the kit together, and find out. Okay, here's what's inside. We've got this card that contains the main circuit board and the front panel. Then we've got another card that contains switches, wires, and capacitors. A third card containing resistors, a speaker, and the keyboard. The only other thing in the box is this wooden enclosure. What I'm not seeing anywhere are instructions of any kind, which, frankly, is a little bit worrisome. Also, it looks like some of the parts are missing. Specifically, the ICs and the transistors needed to actually build the oscillator. Kind of important. Luckily, the circuit board is really well labeled, so I know what parts I'm missing. Unfortunately, some of them are no longer made, so it may be a challenge to track them down. In the meantime, let's build what we can. Let's start with the main circuit board. Each little set of holes on this circuit board corresponds to a different electrical component. There are capacitors, which store electrical energy, resistors, which limit the flow of current. Then there are a few slightly more complex things like transistors and integrated circuits. I'm going to pick a component at random. I'm going to start with the capacitors. One thing I have to be careful about is electrolytic capacitors actually go bad over time, which means the ones in this kit are almost definitely no good. So instead of using those, I'm just going to replace them with fresh capacitors from my own collection. There are few things that are more relaxing than putting together an electronics kit. I love the smell of the solder, and there's something oddly satisfying about how repetitive the process is. Each component follows the same general pattern. Take the component out, push the metal leads through the holes on the circuit board, bend the leads back so the component doesn't fall out, solder it, and then finally, clip the leads. At this point, I've got all the capacitors in. Let's move on to the resistors. Okay, this is the final step on this board. You remember how I said I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to get a hold of all the parts? I actually managed to track down every last component, including this integrated circuit chip, which I'm now inserting into the socket. Okay, so this circuit is done, but this was the easy part because everything is so nicely labeled. In a sense, the circuit board is itself an instruction guide. Here is where my worry sets in. These little dots are connection points for wires, and these wires need to be attached to the batteries, the speaker, the keys, and the front panel controls. None of that is labeled. I have no way of knowing what goes where, and I don't understand the circuit at all, so I have to figure it out just by trial and error. I really hope I don't fry this thing. I'm going to unwrap these cables, and we're just going to see how many of these we can figure out. There are letters next to the holes, and I assume that the letters correspond to the colors of the cables. Y for yellow, P for purple, so on and so forth. Now that that's done, I'm going to try to situate the circuit board in the case. This is the bottom of the case here, and the circuit board is going to sit here in this corner. I know this because it's the only place where the screw holes line up. Now let's try to figure out what each of these cables corresponds to. Now I know that the yellow cable is going to hook up to this keyboard because that's actually labeled on the other circuit board. That's the only one I know for sure. Also, I have a hunch that these white and black cables on the far left are going to go to the speaker. The next cables I want to try to figure out are the power cables. If I can figure out which of these things will hook up to the batteries, then at least the circuit will have power. And once that circuit has power, I can try different combinations of wires to get it to make sound. In fact, I'm going to wire the whole thing up with alligator clips and try every possible combination until I get some sound. Okay, look at this. I cross these two wires, and I get sound. And what's more, I've hooked up the other two wires, the yellow and the purple, to a random variable resistor that I had lying around, and I can actually change the pitch of the sound. That means those two wires, the yellow and the purple, are the ones we're going to be hooking up to the keyboard. Knowing what we know now, it's pretty easy to figure out the other wires just through process of elimination. We have wires for the volume control, power switch, and vibrato. This is a huge win. I'm pretty confident now that this is actually going to work. Okay, I think we're finally ready to work on the keyboard. This part is very easy. You remember how before I was controlling the pitch using that knob? That knob is a variable resistor, and this keyboard works in exactly the same way. It contains a series of fixed resistors that are set up in such a way that every time you press a different key, a different resistance is produced. Since these are mapped to pitch, we get different notes when different keys are pressed. Once I've soldered all of these together, I'm going to clip them. Next, I'm going to solder these little metal contact springs into place. Once that's done, I'm going to screw it into the chassis. Right here you can see the key press mechanism, and it's basically just a metal tab, and when you press it down, it makes contact with the metal bar below it. At this point, we've got ourselves a working keyboard. We just need to tune it. The circuit board is labeled with which key is supposed to correspond to A 440 Hz. And I've got the tuner out, and basically all I do is hold down that key and then turn the variable resistor until the pitch matches what it's supposed to. Much to my surprise, it looks like the whole keyboard is pretty much in tune. Okay, time to screw the key mechanism on top of this. Next, we put the front panel controls in. Okay, this is kind of a momentous occasion. I'm peeling off the adhesive backing from the front panel labels. I really want to make sure I get this straight because there are no do-overs here. I think that looks pretty good. Look at that! We've got ourselves a synth. Not bad. It is very dry sounding. In fact, let's add some reverb. That's much better. Here's a cool thing. I'm noticing that the volume slider isn't just changing the volume. It's also changing the sound. Here's what the waveform looks like at low volume. And here's what it looks like at full volume. So yeah, completely different sound. It seems like it's acting like a filter. One of the weird things about this synth is how clean it is. When I see gear from the 70s, I'm used to it looking at least a little bit worn. Because this was never assembled, never touched, it really feels like a time capsule. A brand new object, but from 43 years ago. Overall, I'm really happy with this thing. It was a delight to build, and it sounds really cool. By the way, if you're wondering why it says organ on the label and on the box, in the 70s, consumers were still way more familiar with organs, so that's often how these devices got marketed. Needless to say, I have turned the sounds of this cool little synth into a decent sampler preset. The decent sampler version has way more features than the actual synth: filter, chorus, reverb, etc. That's available to my patrons. Joining the Patreon is $5, and you get an exclusive sample library at the end of each month. By the way, if you join, you can also download all of the old exclusive libraries too. If you enjoyed this video, now is a great time to subscribe. It's free and you'll be notified whenever I make one of these videos. See you soon!